Okay, so let's get started. And well, the first thing we're going to do is we got to figure out what we're actually building. So I've written a quick little description of what our end result is going to be. Create a program that will calculate the area of a rectangle using dimensions entered by the user. And of course, the only two dimensions involved in a rectangle are length and width. So in order to calculate this area, I need data to store, or I need variables to store all my information. So if I'm getting the dimensions, I need variables for those dimensions. So var length and var width. Now notice I don't give them values at this point because I don't know what they are. The user's going to type those in. Well, what am I calculating? Well, I'm calculating the area. So var area. Now that's the basic data that we're going to use. Now to create everything, all these different entities, we're going to start off with the text box. And the text box represents that place where the user is going to type in. But in order to get them to type something in, we need to prompt them first. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to output a few text messages to indicate to the user what to do. Let's start off with creating a simple title. So what I'm going to do is create a text command, text. And we're going to make this pretty big because this is going to be the title. So let's say 30 pixels, Century Gothic. As you guys know, that's my favorite font. And what am I going to type in here? Let's say rectangle area calculator. Very simple. And where are we going to put it? Well, let's just make a rough guess. Let's say 200 pixels over. Oops. What's going on here? Let's say 200 pixels over and 35 pixels down. Now we can test this. Let's just save this work. We can go back over to Chrome and we hit F5 and we get the title. Nothing else. Nothing else is going on here. So let's keep going. Now we need our prompts for our information that we're going to be asking for. We're going to be asking for two pieces of information, the length and the width. I could put this broad description of, please enter the length of your rectangle. But that's a little over verbose for what we're doing. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little indicator, which is length and then a colon. The colon is kind of that indicator that says, enter your text here, please. So let's add the same idea. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. Improve my lazy factor here. And we're going to reduce a few things. We're going to reduce the size of this. So let's say 15 pixels Calibri. Just to keep it simple. Everybody knows this font. And we need to change the text. Notice I've actually changed everything, so I don't think I've actually saved anything by copying and pasting, but whatever. Now let's move this one down a little bit. It needs to be lower than the title, so I'm going to put this down at a Y value of 60, and I'm going to put it closer to the left edge of the screen. So we're just going to get 30 pixels from the left and 60 pixels from the top of the screen. And we're going to do the same thing for the width. Oops. And of course we don't want to put it in the exact same location. Let's move it down a little bit. So let's move it down to 90 pixels. So let's save this, go back to Chrome and run it. And now we have our prompts. Now we don't have a place for the user to type anything in yet. That's what we're going to be focusing on right now. Now going into the helper.js and scrolling down to the portion of the user interface logic, get to it. This is the subprogram that we're going to call, the function that we're going to call, create text box. Now, if you were to manually do this, you would have to go through all this kind of stuff. What I've done is I've set up a general thing to try and emulate what happens in a lot of different other IDEs for various languages like C# or Visual Basic or something like that, where you can essentially just drag a text box onto the screen and it just automatically sets all this stuff up. We have to do it manually through code, but it's not that bad. So what's going to happen is when we call this create text box, what it's going to do is it's going to create an element, a text box element, which is made for input with all the data that we supply, an X location, a Y location, a width, and a height, and some text, some default text. Default text means what is going to appear inside that text box when the web page first loads. Usually you're probably going to want that blank. However, sometimes you might want to give it a starting value just in case the user forgets to type something in. So that is an option, but again, it is optional. So you could just simply put quote, quote, and it'll fill it with nothing. That's fine too. This function actually returns the text box as a result as well. That way we can use it for later purposes. Right now though, let's just create the text box. So we got to call this function create text box, and we need to store what it creates into a variable. So we need a variable to store this. So let's go back to our main.js. So I know I need a variable for this text box. So just to keep consistent with other languages, we're going to use some similar naming conventions. And naming conventions in other languages say when you're creating a control, a text box, a button, a label, or anything like that, we give it a 3-letter prefix just to indicate to the programmer what type of control it is and the fact that it is a control. So every control is going to have a different 3-letter prefix. So for example, text box has a 3-letter prefix txt. Makes sense. A button would have the 3-letter prefix btn. A label lbl. That's usually exactly what you're thinking. The idea is that it's intuitive. So let's create a text box which is going to hold the user entered length and the user entered width. So we need one for both of them. So a var, my 3-letter prefix txt, and then I'm going to create just a descriptive name. So let's say user, oh my goodness, did it twice, user length. And I'm going to need another one for the width. Var txt user width. I haven't added any data to this, so all we've done is reserve the space so far at this point. We're going to instantiate these variables lower down below our text outputs. So down here, I just got to call that create text box function from the helper.js and store the result inside of our txt variables that we created above. So for example, txt user length, we're going to assign it the result of create text box, and we need to give it a few pieces of information, 5 pieces of information. The first piece of information is default text. Now this is a user length, so just to keep it simple so our math doesn't go all awry, I'm going to give it a default value of 1. That means that when this web page first loads, there's going to be a 1 written inside that text box. If I wanted nothing, all I'd have to do is get rid of the value in there, and it would just fill it with empty quotes essentially. But I do want that 1. The next thing we need to do is specify an X and a Y. Now I want it roughly in line with my length text prompt over here. So I want the Y value pretty close to the 60. Now the text boxes are aligned a little bit differently than our text is, but that's to be expected. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to move it over to the right of our text prompt here. So I'm going to say 100 pixels over, and I'm going to say 50 pixels down, which is a little bit higher than the 60 of the text prompt, but you'll see why in a second. And then I need to specify the size of my text box. How big do I want it? Well, let's say 120 pixels wide by 20 pixels high. Now just to demonstrate this, if I save this and go back into Chrome and we hit F5, we actually get the text box showing up. You see that it's relatively in line with this length prompt. It's below our title, so we haven't lost anything or anything like that. So now we're just going to repeat the process for the width. So we're going to copy and paste. Instead of user length, this time I want user width. And it's going to be the exact same logic. The only difference being that I'm going to have to drop this down a little bit. Let's drop this down to 80, 30 pixels lower. Just like this one was 30 pixels lower. Save, and we go back. Oops. Let's hit cancel, hit save again. Go back and hit F5, and now we have both text boxes. So I can start to type in here. I can start typing letters, I can type in numbers, whatever I would like. Now, going back to our program itself, at this point the programs don't do a whole lot. All they're going to do is give the user a place to type in. But we actually haven't done anything with that text. I can't even access that data at this point. The user's just typing aimlessly. The next module is going to talk about how we actually start to retrieve that data in an effective way and start to use it effectively. So that's it for this one.